Some moments don't announce themselves as life-changing. They arrive quietly, disguised as accidents, wrapped in irritation and sealed with spilled coffee. It was one of those mornings when everything seemed determined to go wrong for Lena Brooks. Her alarm failed, her ride canceled, and now, rushing through the polished glass doors of Cole and Wright Designs, she collided straight into a man who looked like he had never made a mistake in his life. The coffee slipped from her hand in slow, horrifying motion. It landed directly across a spread of architectural blueprints. Silence followed. The kind of silence that makes your heartbeat sound too loud. Lena froze, her breath caught somewhere between apology and panic. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," she rushed out, grabbing tissues that were clearly not enough for the disaster she had caused. The man didn't move immediately. Ethan Cole stood still, staring down at the ruined designs. His sharp jaw tightened slightly, and for a second, Lena braced herself for anger, cold, cutting, deserved. But it didn't come. Instead, he looked at her. Not past her. Not through her. At her. And something about that gaze made her feel like he was trying to understand how she had disrupted a world that was always perfectly controlled. "Do you always make an entrance like this?" he finally asked, his voice low, measured. Lena swallowed, forcing a nervous smile. "Only when I'm trying to impress someone." Pause. Then, unexpectedly, the faintest shift in his expression, almost amusement. It was gone as quickly as it appeared. "You'll need to fix this," Ethan said, stepping aside and gesturing to the mess. Lena nodded quickly. "I will. I promise." Neither of them knew it yet. But that spill, that moment, that accidental collision. It was the beginning of something neither of them could control. And for Ethan Cole, that might be the most dangerous part of all. Working with Ethan Cole was nothing like Lena Brooks had imagined, and somehow, exactly as intimidating. By the next morning, she found herself seated across from him in his office, a space that reflected him too perfectly. Clean lines. Minimal decor. Everything in its place. No room for error. No room for chaos. Which made Lena feel like she didn't belong there at all. "These are the revised drafts," she said, carefully sliding the newly printed pages across his desk. She had stayed up half the night reformatting, rechecking, and reworking every detail she had ruined. Ethan didn't respond immediately. He studied the pages with a focus so intense it made her nervous just watching him. Finally he nodded once. "You're thorough." Lena blinked, surprised. "I try to be." "You'll need more than that here," he added, his tone neutral. "Details matter." There was the wall again. Still, she refused to let it discourage her. "Good thing I learned fast." For a brief second, Ethan's eyes lifted to meet hers. Something unreadable flickered there before he looked back down. That became their rhythm. Days turned into long hours of quiet collaboration. Lena asked questions. Ethan gave precise answers. She filled the silence with light conversation. He responded with short, controlled replies. But something subtle began to shift. One evening, long after the office had emptied, Lena noticed the tension in his shoulders as he ended a phone call. His jaw was clenched, his hand still gripping his phone like he was holding back frustration. She hesitated, then stood. "You okay?" she asked gently. "I'm fine," he replied quickly. She didn't believe him. Without overthinking it, Lena stepped closer and wrapped her arms around him in a brief, careful hug. Ethan froze. Completely. As if no one had touched him like that in a long time. Lena pulled back almost immediately. "Sorry, you looked like you needed it." He didn't respond right away. But something in his expression had changed. And for the first time, Ethan Cole didn't feel entirely in control. It started with small things, so small they could have easily been ignored. But Lena Brooks noticed. Ethan Cole no longer dismissed her questions as quickly. He didn't cut her off mid-sentence. Sometimes he even actually paused, to consider what she said before responding. It wasn't warmth, not yet. But it wasn't distance either. It was something in between. And that was new. "You missed a measurement here," Ethan said one afternoon, tapping lightly on the blueprint between them. Lena leaned closer, their shoulders nearly brushing. "I didn't miss it. I adjusted it," she replied, pointing at a note in the margin. "See? It gives the design more balance." Ethan studied it, his brow furrowing slightly. Then slowly he nodded. "It works." Lena blinked, caught off guard. "That's it? No lecture." "I only lecture when it's necessary," he said, though there was the faintest trace of something softer in his tone. She smiled. "I'll take that as progress." He didn't argue. That too was new. But the real shift came the night the rain refused to stop. A sudden storm trapped them both in the office long after everyone else had left. The city outside blurred into streaks of light and water, the sound of rain steady against the windows. Lena sat curled slightly on the couch, holding a warm cup of tea she had insisted on making. Ethan remained at his desk, though his focus had clearly drifted. "You ever just stop?" she asked suddenly. Ethan glanced at her. "Stop what?" "Everything," she said softly. "Work. Thinking. Pretending you're okay when you're not." The question lingered between them. For a moment he looked like he might brush it off. But then he said quietly, "No." Lena nodded as if she had expected that answer. "Maybe you should try it sometime," she said. Ethan didn't reply. But for the first time in a long time he didn't return to his work either. And somewhere between the silence and the sound of rain, the walls he had built so carefully began to crack. The shift didn't happen all at once. It built, quietly, steadily, until one moment tipped everything over. It was late again. The kind of late where the world outside felt distant, and the office lights hummed softly against the silence. Lena sat across from Ethan, reviewing notes, while he paced slowly behind his desk, tension evident in every step. "You don't have to carry everything alone," Lena said gently, not looking up from the page. Ethan stopped. "I'm not carrying anything," he replied too quickly. Lena glanced up this time, her expression calm but unconvinced. "You say that like I'm supposed to believe it." "I don't need you to believe anything," he said, his voice sharpening slightly. "Just focus on your work." There it was again, the wall. Strong. Familiar. But this time Lena didn't step back. Instead, she closed the file in front of her. "Why do you push people away when they try to understand you?" Ethan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Because people don't actually want to understand. They want something from you." "I don't," she said quietly. That made him look at her. Really look at her. The silence stretched, thick with something unspoken. And then, before he could stop himself, the words slipped out, raw, unfiltered, honest in a way he wasn't used to. "I want to strip you bare on this desk," he said, his voice low but steady. Lena froze, not in fear but in surprise. Ethan took a step closer, his expression intense, searching. "Not like that," he added quickly, his tone shifting. "I mean everything you hide. Every guarded piece. Every smile you use to cover what you really feel." The room felt smaller somehow. "I want to understand you," he continued. "Completely. Without the walls." Lena's breath softened as the meaning settled in. This wasn't control. This wasn't distance. This was vulnerability, clumsy, unfamiliar, but real. For the first time, Ethan wasn't hiding behind perfection. He was reaching. And Lena didn't pull away. After that night, nothing returned to the way it was. Not the silence. Not the distance. Not even Ethan. He didn't take the words back, and somehow that mattered more than anything else. The following days felt different. Softer in ways neither of them openly acknowledged. The tension that once filled the space between them began to ease, replaced by something quieter. Something careful. Something real. Lena noticed it first. Ethan started asking questions. Not about work. Not about deadlines or measurements. About her. "Why writing?" he asked one afternoon, leaning back slightly in his chair, his eyes steady on her. Lena paused, surprised by the shift. "Because it's the only place I can say things I don't know how to say out loud." Ethan considered that. "And what are you not saying out loud?" She hesitated. This was new territory. But she remembered his words, without the walls. So she took a breath. "I'm afraid," she admitted quietly. "Of being left. Of being not enough when someone finally sees all of me." The confession lingered in the air. Ethan didn't interrupt. Didn't dismiss it. Instead, he nodded slowly as if he understood more than he wanted to admit. "I don't like losing control," he said after a moment. "Everything falls apart when I do." Lena looked at him, really looked this time. "So you hold everything too tightly?" "Yes." "And does that make you feel safe?" Ethan didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, it didn't. Later that evening, as they stood side by side reviewing a final draft, Lena leaned lightly into him without thinking. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't planned. Just a quiet moment of closeness. Ethan stilled for a second, then didn't move away. Instead, slowly, almost cautiously, he allowed himself to rest there too. No words. No pressure. Just presence. And in that simple, shared silence, they began to learn each other piece by piece. It didn't shatter all at once. It unraveled, quietly, painfully, through a single misunderstanding neither of them knew how to fix. Started with something small. It always did. Lena stood just outside the conference room, her hand hovering near the door when she heard Ethan's voice from inside. He wasn't alone. 2 senior partners were with him, their tones businesslike, detached. "We'll need consistency," one of them said. "Temporary arrangements tend to complicate things." Ethan's response came after a pause. "Then we keep it temporary." The words hit harder than they should have. Lena froze. Temporary. Her chest tightened as the conversation continued, but she didn't stay to hear the rest. She didn't want context. Didn't want explanation. Because somehow it already felt clear. That was what she was to him. A temporary fix. A momentary presence. Something useful, but not lasting. By the time Ethan stepped out minutes later, Lena was gone. The shift in her was immediate after that. She became distant. Polite. Professional. Gone were the quiet conversations. The shared silences. The soft, unspoken understanding that had been growing between them. Ethan noticed. Of course he did. "You've been avoiding me," he said one evening, his voice more direct than usual. "I've been working," Lena replied simply, not looking up. "That's not the same thing." She finally met his gaze. "Calm. Controlled." "Isn't it?" she asked. Something about her tone unsettled him. "Did I do something?" he pressed. Lena hesitated, but only for a second. Then she shook her head. "No. I just remembered where I stand." Ethan frowned slightly. "And where is that?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Temporary." The word landed between them like a quiet storm. Ethan didn't know what to say. And instead of fighting for clarity, he did what he had always done best. He said nothing. Lena nodded once as if that silence confirmed everything. And just like that, they both let go, without ever truly trying to hold on. The absence didn't feel loud. It felt hollow. Like something important had been quietly removed, leaving behind a space neither of them knew how to fill. For Ethan Cole, life returned to what it had always been, structured, efficient, controlled. Meetings flowed into deadlines. Designs were approved. His work remained flawless. And yet, something was off. The office felt colder. Not physically, but in a way he couldn't ignore. No soft interruptions. No unexpected questions. No quiet presence sitting across from him, making the long hours feel less heavy. Lena Brooks was gone. Not completely, she still came in, still worked, still existed within the same walls, but the connection they had built had vanished. Replaced by polite nods and careful distance. And Ethan didn't know how to fix something he didn't fully understand. Meanwhile, Lena buried herself in her writing. Page after page. Story after story. But the words didn't feel right anymore. They lacked something. Depth. Emotion. Truth. She would stare at her screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard, only to close her laptop in frustration. Because the one thing that had made her writing feel alive was the very thing she had walked away from. One evening she found herself rereading an unfinished draft. The characters were close, almost reaching each other, but neither of them spoke. Neither of them tried. And suddenly it felt too familiar. Too real. Back at the office, Ethan stood by the window, staring out at the city lights. His reflection stared back at him, calm, composed, unchanged. But that wasn't true. Something had changed. He exhaled slowly, the realization settling in deeper than he expected. It wasn't the work. It wasn't the silence. It wasn't even the distance. It was her. What they had, imperfect, uncertain, unfinished, had mattered. More than he allowed himself to admit. And now that it was gone, he felt it. Completely. Ethan didn't plan it. Not the timing. Not the words. Not even the way his heartbeat refused to stay steady as he stood outside Lena's apartment door. All he knew was that doing nothing had already cost him too much. So this time he chose differently. The door opened slowly. Lena stood there, surprise flickering across her face before she quickly masked it. "Ethan?" He noticed it immediately, the distance she tried to keep even now. "I needed to see you," he said, his voice quieter than usual but firm. She hesitated, then stepped aside. "You didn't have to." "I did," he replied. The door closed behind him, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The space felt unfamiliar, like they were standing on opposite sides of something fragile. Lena crossed her arms slightly. "If this is about work, we can handle it tomorrow." "It's not about work." That made her look at him. Really look this time. Ethan exhaled slowly, as if choosing his next words carefully, not perfectly but honestly. "I heard what you said," he began. "About being temporary." Her expression shifted, guarded. "You said it first." "I didn't mean you," he said immediately. Silence. I meant the situation. The arrangement. Not you, he continued. But I didn't explain that. I didn't correct it. And you believed something I should have never let you believe. Lena's eyes softened slightly, but the hurt was still there. You didn't stop me. I know. That single admission carried more weight than any excuse. Ethan stepped closer, not too much, just enough. I don't want temporary, he said. Not with you. Her breath caught just slightly. I don't want control if it means losing something real, he added. And I don't want to stand there again and say nothing when it matters. The room felt still. Then, slowly, Lena closed the distance and wrapped her arms around him. No hesitation this time. No doubt. Ethan held her back, firm, steady, certain. And in that quiet embrace, they didn't fix everything. But they started. And this time, neither of them let go too quickly. They didn't rush back into what they had. That was the difference this time. There were no assumptions. No silent expectations. No pretending everything was suddenly perfect just because they had found their way back to each other. Instead, Ethan and Lena chose something slower. Something intentional. And somehow that made it stronger. It started with small decisions. Ethan began showing up, not just physically but emotionally. He explained things he would have once kept to himself. He asked questions and waited for the answers, even when they weren't easy to hear. Lena, in turn, stopped holding back her fears. When something bothered her, she said it. When she felt uncertain, she didn't hide behind quiet smiles. They learned to speak, even when it was uncomfortable. One evening, they sat across from each other in the same office where everything had begun. The desk between them no longer felt like a barrier, but a reminder. Are you afraid? Lena asked softly. Ethan didn't pretend to misunderstand. Yes. Of what? He met her eyes. That I'll fall back into old habits. That I'll push you away without realizing it. Lena nodded slowly. And what do you do when you feel that way? Ethan paused. Then, honestly, I remind myself that you're not something to manage. You're someone to understand. That answer stayed with her. Later, as they stood side by side reviewing a design, Lena gently slipped her hand into his. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a grand gesture. But it was a choice. Ethan looked at their hands for a moment, then tightened his hold just slightly. A silent promise. They weren't perfect. They still had things to learn, things to unlearn. But every day in ways both big and small. They chose each other. And this time it wasn't out of uncertainty. It was with intention. Time has a way of showing you what really matters. Years had passed since that first spilled coffee, the moment that had unknowingly set everything in motion. Ethan Cole and Lena Brooks had built something neither of them expected, yet both had quietly hoped for. A love rooted not in grand gestures but in understanding, patience, and trust. The office, once a place of tension, deadlines, and long, lonely hours, had become a space of shared laughter, quiet support, and small moments that mattered more than any blueprint or manuscript. Lena's writing flourished, often inspired by Ethan's quiet presence, and Ethan's designs reflected a new warmth, a subtle depth he had never allowed himself before. One afternoon, Ethan found Lena at his desk, poring over her latest draft. He leaned casually against the edge, watching her fingers glide over the pages. She didn't notice him at first, completely absorbed, but when she finally looked up, her smile met his. I meant what I said all those years ago, he murmured softly, taking the seat beside her. I wanted to know all of you, and I still do. Lena's eyes softened, reflecting the journey they had both endured. I know, she replied, her voice steady yet warm. And I still trust you with it. No words could fully capture the depth of what they shared, so they didn't speak. Instead, they leaned into each other, a quiet hug that spoke of years of growth, forgiveness, and unwavering choice. In that moment, the office didn't feel like a workplace. It felt like home. They had discovered that love wasn't about perfection, intensity, or fleeting passion. It was about presence, trust, and the courage to show each other every layer without fear. And as they sat there, side by side, hands entwined and hearts aligned, they both knew, finally, that forever didn't need fireworks. Just needed each other.